Hi everyone, this is Laura and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to try painting with gouache for the first time and then share my thoughts and experiences with you so you can see if this medium is something that you'd like to try. Now, this isn't a formal review of the paints I'm using, it's just my first impressions, but if you'd like to see a complete review, let me know in the comments. The first part of this video, I do miss some of the footage, and unfortunately it was lost due to technical problems. So I do apologize for that, but unfortunately there wasn't any way for me to save it. Now let's talk about the supplies I used. First thing we'll talk about is the Etch A Perfect sketchbook. It is an A5 size, which translates to 5.5 by I believe 8.3. The sketchbook does contain 100% cotton paper and it is 140 pounds. I've used the sketchbook quite a few times. This was the first time I'd used gouache on it, and for the most part I really enjoyed the experience. I didn't have a whole lot of issues with the paper. It did dry faster than what I was used to, but overall it was a really pleasant experience to use, and I was really happy that that's the paper that I went with. Having sketchbooks that have 100% cotton paper is a must for me, especially in the area that I live in, because the paper generally stays wet and it actually absorbs into the fibers. So I was really happy with the sketchbook, and it's the one that I always reach for if I'm using any kind of wet media. So alright, so now the paints that I used are the Magicfly 24 set of the Jelly Gouache paints. There are pigment numbers for this paint as well as light fastness ratings. I'm not going to open it up right now. I can do that in another video if that's something you'd like to see, but I really enjoyed using these paints. It had a nice selection of colors. So yeah, everything was really nice. The packaging and casing is very sturdy. It's nice to travel with. The bottom has these round circles that you can help you pop the paint cups out if you need to refill them for any reason. But yeah, I really liked the packaging on it and it worked well. So the next thing that I have to talk about is the paintbrush that I used. It is a Princeton Snap number 6 round, and this paintbrush worked great. It's a little bit stiffer than a typical watercolor brush, but it worked really well with the gouache paint that had a little bit more body due to its opacity and thickness. So I really enjoyed using it. I did use a larger brush for the larger areas of the painting, but that's not featured here, so I won't go ahead and talk about that, but any larger brush would use for an application like that. Anyway, this brush, I have a couple other sizes and it was awesome. I attempted to use this Jelly Roll white gel pen by Sakura for the white highlights, and unfortunately it didn't work out as well as I'd hoped, but that's okay. So now the first thing I started off with was the ceramic plate, which is what I use for watercolor, but then I moved on to the Masterson. Oop, I didn't even realize I was holding it upside down. Anyways, the Masterson Stay Wet palette. I normally use it for acrylic paint, but it worked out better than the ceramic plate by far, so that's the one that I will continue to use with gouache, but I'll talk about that more later in the video. Anyway, it was a great palette to use. I really enjoyed it, but these are the things that I used to create this piece. Okay, I'm going to take a second and talk about gouache. The reputation is that it's a blend between watercolor and acrylic, and it really has earned that reputation because of how it behaves. While it's still made with the same binder as watercolor, and it also has glycerin in it, its opacity is very much like acrylic paint. But you can still add water it down, and use it like a watercolor. So you kind of get the best of both worlds when you're exploring with this medium. I really enjoyed it initially. Well, overall with the whole experience, I enjoyed it. I will say that in the beginning, I was quite frustrated. I had watched some videos on how to use gouache, but I kind of wanted to just get in there and experiment with it and see, kind of figure things out for myself. And I think that was part of my, well, not necessarily first mistake, but I think I probably would have had a lot less frustration had I done a little bit more research than what I did. So at first, like I said, I was frustrated with the paint, but it had more to do with my lack of experience using it than the paint itself. This paint set, for anyone who knows how to use gouache, was fine. It was great. The paints were moist, the consistency was fine. I had no problems mixing colors. So in that aspect, it was great. I loved the box that the paints came in, very sturdy. Didn't feel like it was going to break open at any time. And it even had a plastic sleeve on the inside that kept the paints even more dry, along with a foam seal on the cover. So that was really nice. What really was working against me that I had to try to find a way around is the climate that I live in. I live in a really dry environment, and unfortunately, that means that when I was putting paint down, it was drying almost immediately when I put it on the paper. Like, it wasn't instantly dry, but it was in its drying process. And that, while you can reactivate paint, it was a little bit frustrating because I'd go to my palette to pick up some more paint and I'd have to add more water, which would thin out the consistency, and it was just an ongoing battle. So I'd either add too much water or I wouldn't add enough. So what I ended up doing on the long run is switching from my ceramic plate palette that I use for my watercolors over to my Masterson Stay Wet palette that I normally use for acrylic. And things went much smoother because the paint stayed more moist longer, and when I was able to manage the consistency better, which resulted in a much more pleasant experience. So as I worked through the piece, I got more used to the consistency. Like I said, after I changed palettes, and the opacity was just absolutely a dream to work with, because with acrylic paint, for me, if I don't use a Stay Wet palette, it dries so fast and it can be so difficult to work with. But with this having a reactivated quality, it really made the experience so wonderful, and I really enjoyed it. Now I want to go into some of the aspects of how this paint blended. Once I got it on the paper and was able to add my different values and then start blending them together, they blended like a dream. I was able to just slap some paint on there, blend them together, and they just did it seamlessly. There wasn't a lot of overworking that needed to be done. It was just such an awesome experience to be able to do that, and you get some really, really neat textures. I think you can really see those qualities in the trees. On the left-hand side there, where I added some lighter values where the sun was hitting it, it was just beautiful. And then it's like I'm adding some darker values and some shading for where the foliage is casting a shadow, and it just turned out so beautifully. Same thing goes for the right-hand side. I started out by adding the cast shadows, and then later on you'll see I go into adding some of the cooler shadows by using a blue tone, and it didn't look stark. I was able to blend it in, so it just looked very seamless. Like right here, you can see where that happens. Initially, you just slap down some paint, but then you can blend it out, and it really gives it that look that when you're looking through the trees and you can see where the cooler, darker areas are. It really was awesome. And then I was able to add in some lighter tones later on for the highlights. Here I add in a little bit of yellow. Later on I'm going to add in a mixture. It's very light hints of yellow in it, but it's mostly a white mixture for the really bright highlights for where the sun is casting through the trees and hitting the tree trunk, like right here. And initially I was a little concerned because it's so stark against that dark trunk, but later on I go in and I soften those, and it just was very, very beautiful to work with. So I'm going to turn up the music for a little bit so you guys can enjoy some of the painting process, and I'll tune back in a little later. here's where I'm going in with the Micron Fineliner. I believe this is a number 5 to do a lot of the outlining for the character, and it turned out pretty well. I was quite pleased with it. The only part initially that I really didn't care for was her mouth, but you'll see later on that I do go in and fix that, and it really does showcase how well you can cover and redo mistakes. So there really isn't a limitation with this paint. If something doesn't work out the way you want it to, you can just wait till it dries, paint over it, and try it again. So that was really awesome. The other thing that I did notice is the gouache, once it dried, did clog the nibs on the Fineliners. So every so often, I'd have to clean the nib on a clean piece of paper, and then I'd have to continue outlining. So occasionally you'll see me go over to my little notebook there and scribble on it. And that's what I'm doing, is I'm cleaning off the nib so this way I can get the ink flowing again. I think next time I'm going to try using a dip pen or black gouache with a detail brush for the outlining and see if I have a better result and not quite so much issues that I have to fiddle with. Okay, so I'm tuning back in because I wanted to talk to you guys about how well gouache is at fixing mistakes. Because of its opaque quality, if there's something that you're not happy with, like I was with the mouth on here, you can go in and cover it with the gouache, wait till it dries, and then draw over it. So I am going to sing gouache's praise at its ability to fix mistakes. It works very much like acrylic in that matter, and honestly, it's something that really gives you a less stressful painting experience. So now I'm curious, have you ever tried gouache? If so, how'd you like it? Were you frustrated at the beginning like me? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear what your experiences were, and I really hope that you enjoyed this painting. I'll put all the links to the materials I used in the description, and I do want to say this video was not sponsored by anybody, and I thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I love sharing my art and experiences with you. If you would like to see more content from my channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. If there's something else that you want to see, let me know in the comments. I want to hear from you. Please come follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!